So I finished Final Fantasy VII Rebirth a couple of days ago, and to be completely honest, my head is still completely reeling from it. And while I'm swirling on theories and opinions about this game and its ending, something I cannot stop thinking about is the way that this game uses Zack fair. I won't lie, I'm one of the fans who really enjoys his extended development that he's gotten since the OG with Crisis Core, and I'm just a really big fan of his character. But I was also very cautious about his placement in the remake trilogy, because in the original Final Fantasy VII story, he really does work best as a narrative tool. So seeing him have a crucial and extended role in the trilogy had me both worried and excited. But after finishing Rebirth, the way the writers and directors of this game handled his character was way better than anything I could have possibly expected. Somehow, the devs at Square Enix were able to expand upon the character they built in Crisis Core, while simultaneously keeping that air of mystery that Zack has in the original, but doing it in a brand new way. This game really is a love letter to Final Fantasy VII and its compilation titles, because Zack gets to be what he always has been, just on a grander scale, because Zack is and always has been a beacon of hope to the characters of Final Fantasy VII. Zack Fair is actually a lot different than any other of the main cast members of this game. One of the main reasons that Final Fantasy VII really resonated with people almost 30 years ago was because the characters of the game felt extremely real. They had faults and they made mistakes, but then that eventually leads to great character development. And so far, the remake trilogy has done a pretty good job of expanding upon that, all except for Zack. See, even in the original, Zack was never supposed to be like that. He's supposed to be the perfect character. Even amongst all of the trials and tribulations he goes through, he still comes out on top, unwavering. That's why Cloud looked up to him so much. He wanted to be perfect like Zack. And then in Crisis Core, that part of his character is expanded upon. He goes through his hero's journey, and he does have to go through a lot of issues, but he comes out on top without faltering really at all. This kind of character doesn't really belong with the main cast of Final Fantasy VII, but the devs at Square Enix were able to do something very smart and take that opportunity to do something with his character that they can't really do with anyone else in the main party. They effectively turned Zack into a Superman character. Let me explain what I mean by that. Superman is the superhero. He is the template that every single superhero that has ever been made has been built on. Because Superman represents ideals, he represents the best of humanity. That's why the best Superman stories are not the stories where Superman develops as a character, but how the world develops and is made better because he is there. Superman is a shining light of hope, not just to Metropolis, but to the world. And I firmly believe Zack represents the same thing to the people of Final Fantasy VII. In the insanely crazy opening of the game, Zack is theoretically at his worst. After 5 years of being on the run from Shinra, he's finally home. But when he gets there, he has to save Aerith from Shinra, and when he does save her, she's in a coma. The prologue ends with him crying into her motionless body. But when we finally get to see him, he's sprung to action. We see that he is trying his best to take care of both Aerith and Cloud, putting their needs before his. And the environmental storytelling here is actually really cool. When we first see Zack in this cutscene, he is in a cradle position on an empty mattress. We learn it's because he's using the 2 proper beds in the shed to take care of both Aerith and Cloud. And we see them being covered on the bed by 2 different blankets. The implication here being that Zack found 2 blankets and decided to use the 2 blankets on the people who needed them most. Except that's not the case. There is a 3rd blanket in this scene. Aerith's head is being propped up by a 3rd blanket, something Cloud distinctly does not have, which means that there were 3 blankets for them to use. Zack just used the 3rd one, and instead of giving it to himself, he gave it to Aerith because he felt like she needed it more. And that's just who Zack is, always putting the needs of others before himself. Mind you, a few hours ago, this man was inches away from death. He's got to be tired out of his mind, yet the people he loves comes first. But eventually, he does get into an argument with Elmira and decides that yes, it is best that Aerith and Cloud stay at Aerith's house. And being outside in Sector 5, Zack gets to see firsthand just how depraved this world is. Oates is so sad to see Aerith in this kind of state, and Elmira straight up says to Zack, that people think the world is going to end. And the cutscene ends with Zack coming to terms with the fact that he is in a world that has lost all hope. And then we get to see what he's up to again, right before the first gold saucer date. And it's in this cutscene that we get to see a glimpse of what his purpose is in this story, as he gets to talk to a character that he never gets to talk to in the original, and that's Marlene. And there's a really interesting juxtaposition here between how Marlene meets Cloud and how Marlene meets Zack. In Remake, just the sight of Cloud scares Marlene, enough to make her run behind her dad, which is funny enough considering she watched him walk in with her dad and knows that Cloud is a friend of Tifa's. Meanwhile, when Marlene first meets Zack, she has no problems with getting up in his face. She says not only is it proper to say thank you, but he needs to say it now. Zack isn't a scary looking person, and he's supposed to be pretty approachable, which we get to see here. And when he does eventually say thank you, he says it with a smile, something Cloud isn't really known to do in conversations. And Marlene getting on Zack's case is a really funny detail considering the fact that all of the kids that you interact with in Crisis Core also give shit to Zack. Kids give him a rough time, but all in all, it's out of a good place. But eventually in the cutscene, we do get to hear Marlene talking about how she doesn't even know if she's gonna see Tifa or Barrett ever again. Biggs doesn't even take the time out of the day to say hello. So Zack, who already has enough on his plate as it is, decides that he's gonna go out of his way to get Biggs for Marlene, because he knows it'd make her feel better, and despite Aerith and Cloud being his priorities, he can't just let this slip by. And in the grand scheme of things, it's not really a big deal, but it means the world to Marlene. An effect we constantly see Zack have in Crisis Core, whether it's with Angeal, Cloud, Aerith, or even Yuffie. For the grand mystery of the game, we're not actually getting a lot of information here, but as you'll see, these cutscenes with Zack always do two things: introduce to us a new sorrow in this version of Midgar, and then how Zack directly responds to that sorrow, inducing some sort of hope again. And I really thought the mystery of this game would be somewhat answered in an extended section about Zack, which I thought was going to happen in Gongaga because it makes sense. But instead, we get what I believe is far better. We get first-hand accounts of people who knew Zack and how much he impacted their life by just being in it. In the original Final Fantasy VII, Gongaga is an extremely short section. It's a single conversation with Zack's parents that's very sad, and the point of this section is to just tell you that Zack is a person that exists. But this is something that Rebirth changes for the better. Upon entering Gongaga Village, the first person you meet is Cissnei, which means that she kept her promise to Zack at the end of Crisis Core to stay in Gongaga and look after his parents. As far as we know, Cissnei left Shinra and the Turks because of the guilt that she felt that she took a part of his life. And then in the village, there's a side quest by someone who claims to be Zack's childhood best friend. And the whole point of the side quest is that he's trying to be a hero just like Zack was. And not soldier Zack, just who Zack was even as a kid. And then you do eventually get to talk to Zack's parents, who, while they are sad just like the original, they're optimistic. They say that, hey, they say no news is good news. A saying that sounds like it would come from Zack himself. And maybe it's just a fair thing. And to accentuate the point that Zack's presence still lingers within this village, the music is very particular in this part of the game. I found it very interesting that in the 4 cutscenes that we've gotten of Zack so far, none of them have played any Crisis Core music. Remake used a lot of music from the compilation series, specifically from Advent Children, so I thought that since Zack is having an extended part in this game, and they literally re-released Crisis Core a year ago, they were 100% gonna use Crisis Core music in this game. But it never happens until you get to Gongaga and you meet Cissnei. And that's when the Crisis Core theme plays. And it hit me that that makes way more sense. Crisis Core itself represents the prequel to Final Fantasy VII. It's a game that represents nostalgia, and that's all Gongaga is. It's nostalgia for Zack. That's why we don't switch to him in this part of the game, because this area is about remembering him, not seeing what he's doing now. And it's important that what's playing here is the Crisis Core theme, not the Price of Freedom, because the Price of Freedom means something entirely different and is used in a different way in this game. But before we get to that, we actually haven't seen Zack in a while. 2 whole main dungeons and theoretically 2 whole areas go by before we even see him again. And it's on our way to the village of the Gi that we get our biggest Zack cutscene yet. In this cutscene, we finally get to see Zack meet Biggs. And it's here that we learn some pretty important plot information. We learn that this is in fact the Biggs that we knew in Remake, and that both he and Zack went through the same thing. They were on the brink of death when out of nowhere, a burst of wind blew and suddenly they were alive. But most importantly, we learned that both Zack and Biggs feels like that was not supposed to happen. That was supposed to be the moment of their death. But Zack and Biggs have 2 different attitudes about it. Biggs can't really wrap his head around why specifically him. He feels like a background character, so why would he be saved? What purpose does he serve? In fact, Zack actually sings a completely different tune than Biggs does the entire section. And in between the conversations of the 2 piecing the timeline of things together, we get really good character moments between Zack and Biggs. This whole scene is actually one of my favorites in the entire game because narratively, it tells us a whole story within 15 minutes. It has a beginning, a climax, and an end. And the big question of the cutscene isn't what is happening in this timeline, it's what is our purpose here? Biggs quite literally asks Zack that question. Do you ever think about your purpose in this life? And Zack says, yeah, I do actually, all the time. And then he laments about his entire journey in Crisis Core. He mentions that things really changed for him after he joined Shinra and Soldier. And we know that his whole journey had to change and he had to find his ideals and beliefs outside of the company where he thought he got his ideals and beliefs from. So he believes that he was saved on purpose, that there is someone out there who needs him, and there is someone who equally needs Biggs. But Biggs doesn't agree. He can't fathom a world where he's needed in the grand scheme of things. Just like the rest of this Midgar, he's lost hope. And then the scene builds until it finally reaches its climax on the lot off Petal Lane. Biggs puts his last ounce of hope that someone out there would be willing to join Avalanche amongst all the chaos. But no one does. Even Kyrie, who showed up, leaves. She gets cold feet, and that's it for Biggs. He walks off thinking that, hey, that was his last try, he's gonna give up. But Zack sees him walk off with the same defeated look that Oates and Marlene has, and he thinks that's it, I have to do something. He stops Biggs, and he tells him that someone does need him, that there is always something worth fighting for, so long as they have hopes and dreams. And that's Zack's whole thing, embracing your hopes and dreams. And while Crisis Core does have a very hammered-in way of talking about these ideals, what's so great about the writing in this scene is that it is the same conversations that Zack has in Crisis Core. It's putting his ideals versus someone else's, but this time it's not just some comically evil theater kid, it's Biggs. It's someone we understand, it's someone we empathize with, so it's a harder conversation to grasp on. Because in this situation, this is a character we like, and a lot of people would argue that they agree with Biggs. But then eventually, when Zack does come out on top, it's not some grandiose moment where a goddess literally comes out of the sky. He just changes the worldview on someone that not just Zack likes, but we like too. So in that way, we relate to this scene way more than we ever would with a scene with Genesis. And at the end of the cutscene, Biggs doesn't even make a 100% turnaround. He says maybe, but what he does know for a fact, that there is a reason that Zack is here, and the world is very lucky to have him. And as Biggs walks away with his head a little bit higher, Zack mentions that he should probably go home too, catching himself on saying the word home. Because in a conversation where he talked to someone else about how they need to find hopes and dreams, he finally realizes that he made his dreams come true. He's home. And sure, Aerith might be in a coma, but he made it home to her. And she's not dead. And as long as there is a chance that she will wake up, there is everything worth fighting for. And then when Zack gets back to Elmira's house, he's literally greeted with a welcome home. And he's so excited to tell Marlene that he talked to Biggs. And while he did forget to ask about Tifa and Barrett, Marlene doesn't really get mad at him for it. She's more playfully annoyed than anything. Zack has removed the despair that she was feeling prior to that section. Little by little, he is siphoning out the despair of this world, and even though it's one person at a time, he is quite literally changing how people feel about the end of the world. And as we'll come to learn, the despair that comes from these worlds is very important to Sephiroth's plan. But before we get to Sephiroth's plan, we do get a couple of Zack cutscenes outside of the switches that we have to Zack, notably the ones that happen in Nibelheim. And while it is a very cute scene where Zack does talk about Aerith, this is more of a character moment for Cloud. He is misremembering his relationship with Zack, which doesn't happen in the original. But amongst all of that haze, the one thing that he knows for sure is that Zack was his friend. And just the thought of forgetting about Zack makes him ache. Out of all of the characters that Zack makes an impact on, of course the most important one is our main character. And it's easy to forget this because 100% Cloud is at his worst during the events of the original Final Fantasy VII, but Cloud isn't doing exactly great either before the events of Final Fantasy VII. Even before the Nibelheim accident, he's not doing great either. He never made Soldier. He never got to do the thing that he dreamed of, the thing he literally moved out of Nibelheim and into Midgar for. And he doesn't really know exactly what to do, but the thing that keeps him going is the things that Zack says to him. And again, that's the Zack effect. And the best part about Zack's sections in Rebirth is that it gives us the opportunity to see this effect on people that he never gets to meet. We see it happen with Marlene, we see it happen with Biggs, and finally, we see it happen with Elmyra. Before we get to the Zack cutscene before the second Gold Saucer date, in the scene that happens on the way to the village of the Gi, the last thing Elmyra says is that Marlene will be with Barret and Tifa soon, fully implying that she is still on board with the end of the world and that she fully expects all of them to die. But in this new scene, where Zack learns some very distressing information, and information that makes him slightly jealous, he stands in the dead garden pondering what takes precedent here. But then Elmyra comes up to him, and she points out that there is a single flower that has started to bloom. And she asks Zack that, do you think this means Aerith will wake up soon? And Zack literally says, one can only hope. Finally, Elmyra has something worth fighting for. Elmyra fully believes that Aerith can wake up now. She has something to go forward with now, and she even says this. She says that it's hard enough taking care of Cloud and Aerith with Zack's help. She doesn't know if she can do it without him, and that she would be a wreck without Zack. A very different tune than the one that she was saying in that first switch to Zack. And there it is. Even though it's 3 people, all of the people that Zack came into contact with in this version of Midgar had gained hope once again. And that's why Zack is in this story. It's not just to have someone else who is making their way trying to find Sephiroth and stop him. It's to have someone who Sephiroth doesn't even realize is thwarting his plans. And this is where we get into the branching worlds. Now, this isn't an explanation of the branching worlds. There's a lot of good videos about that. But this is specifically about how Zack's part in these branching worlds is very crucial. See, now after emotionally and mentally saving Biggs, Marlene, and Elmyra, Zack now has to physically save 3 people. But he has to make a decision. Which one does he go for first? And that's when we get the first branching world, the world that we've been in. The one where Zack tries to save Cloud by going to Hojo. And mind you, this is a Zack who was just told by Marlene that Aerith has feelings for Cloud. And while he does have a twinge of jealousy on his face, nothing matters more in the world to him than making sure that Aerith survives. So as a remembrance of why he's doing this, he ties Aerith's ribbon to his hand and he sets off to find Hojo. And for the very first time in the entire game, you get to finally hear the price of freedom. Because the price of freedom, originally used in Crisis Core, plays when Zack has to go against all of Shinra. It's his canon event. And it's in the name, and it kind of takes on a double meaning in Crisis Core. It means that his freedom from Shinra, quite literally, is at the cost of his own life, but also the freedom of Cloud, and the freedom Cloud gets to have by being alive, is also at the cost of Zack's life. And now, in this cutscene, he just learned that the woman that he loves has feelings for his best friend, and that the only way she survives is if he saves that very person. And that very sacrifice is this world's price of freedom. The price of Aerith's freedom and the freedom that she gets to live comes at that. And then as we cut in between Cloud and Aerith's date in the dying world, we get to see Zack again, this time in a world where he went for Biggs. And he has this big moment where he talks to Biggs, and has another moment that is a shot-for-shot remake from a CGI cutscene that happens in Crisis Core. Fate comes back, and Biggs gets shot just like he does on top of the pillar. And then again, just like originally, a squadron of Shinra soldiers comes to shoot him down. So maybe it is fate. Maybe it is his fate to die. And Zack says this. He says that fate has one twisted sense of humor, and he feels like he is always the punchline. But, of course, this is Zack, and he's not going to give up to even fate itself. And notably, a much more hopeful version of The Price of Freedom plays during this section. And then in the third and final Corgi world, Zack stands outside of Aerith's church, where he's face to face with Sephiroth. And Sephiroth thinks that the worlds are ending. Zack is bound to die in every single version of this world, so why would he spare even an ounce of effort on Zack? So just like Zack is a plaything to be thrown aside, he splits open the ground and sends Zack to his doom. But someone else has a plan for him. He is saved and he sees the yellow petals, and just like Aerith says in Remake, he follows the flowers. This isn't even a Zack who is fated to die at Shinra's hands. This is a Zack who is dying by Sephiroth's. But even then, he defies that fate once again. And this is where Sephiroth is crucially screwing up. As we know, this is a Sephiroth who knows what happens. This is a Sephiroth who knows that he is supposed to lose by Cloud's hands. And in the original, the reason why he loses by Cloud's hands is because he drastically underestimates Cloud. But he's not underestimating Cloud here. That's why he's specifically messing with him and all of his relationships. He is stopping the person that defeats him at his core. But the thing about Cloud is that Cloud isn't just Cloud. He is a culmination of all of the people that is in his life, including the ones who are dead, notably Aerith and Zack. And Sephiroth says it himself. When Aerith comes to help Cloud at the last Sephiroth fight, he very much underestimates Aerith. And that's the thing about Sephiroth's plan. He divulges to us right before the Temple of the Ancients that the reunion is no longer the reunion of Genova cells. It's the reunion of worlds, where he is trying to take all of the despair from all of the worlds and weaponize it and turn it against the life stream. But how is he supposed to do this if there is someone behind the scenes siphoning the world of despair and returning hope to them? Sephiroth doesn't even know it, but there is someone in all of these worlds who is stealing the despair that he is trying to weaponize and turning it into hope. While we were all clamoring to know more about the timelines and what was going on in these worlds and who in these worlds knows events, what was really happening in these cutscenes were the emotions that Zack was directly changing. Because that's what's actually important. Sure, the big question of the game is, how is Zack alive? What is going on in these different timelines? Are they even timelines, or is it a multiverse, or is it the live stream? What's actually important here is that Zack is helping the main party defeat Sephiroth by returning hope to the world so that there is no despair for Sephiroth to take. And that's what makes him work in this game, even though he fully shouldn't. While our main cast has their layers and their wants and their faults and their needs and their mistakes, Zack is once again now a narrative tool, just like he was in the original. But now the narrative tool that he is here is built upon the way that his ideals were crafted in Crisis Core. The way Zack is written in this game is the best of both worlds, which I didn't think was possible. Crisis Core is a very contained story. It's not about how Zack saves the world, it's about how Zack saves himself and the people that he loves. And at the very end of the game, he asks the question, did I become a hero? Because he didn't quite save the world. He didn't really become the hero that Sephiroth was known as. But he did become a hero, because the actions that he performs in Crisis Core eventually does lead to the fact that Cloud saves the world. And without that happening, Cloud would have never saved the world. But now, in this new trilogy, the hope that he is returning to the world, and his efforts for not only himself to, but for other people to defy fate, now directly saves the world. And he will know without a doubt that he became a hero.